Hello and welcome to Plain Spoken, biotech and medtech interviews with Encode Ideas. My name is Hogan Mullally. I'm a partner at Encode. We've been on a fairly extended hiatus from the podcast, and candidly, it's due almost entirely to market conditions. We did have plans for a podcast or two in January, but I don't think I need to tell our audience how catastrophically bad the life science markets were in January. So the timing just didn't seem right to go ahead with those particular interviews. However, we do see some stability here now in February, crossing our fingers, and we think the timing is appropriate to kick off our 2022 podcast series. And I'm actually really excited to be talking to this particular company and portfolio manager because, ironically enough, it is a company that weathered the difficult start to 2022 quite well and actually was able to consummate a sizable financing. And the company is Perimeter Medical. Perimeter Medical is a medical technology company with a ultra high resolution, real-time imaging technology that is currently focused on breast conservation surgery, lumpectomy. And in January, they closed a almost $50 million Canadian financing led by a $43 million lead order from Social Capital. So I'm really excited today to have the CEO of Perimeter Medical, Jeremy Sobotta, joining me, as well as healthcare portfolio manager at Social Capital, Grant Hesser. From a disclosure perspective, I would highlight that the partners at Encode Ideas do own equity in Perimeter Medical. We were compensated to write research for the company in 2020, but have not received any compensation subsequent to 2020. I would also highlight that this podcast does not contain financial advice. It is for entertainment purposes only. Please do not consider comments made in the podcast as an offer or inducement to buy or sell any securities. And with that, let's turn to my interview with Grant Hesser of Social Capital and Jeremy Sobotta of Perimeter Medical. I would like to welcome Jeremy Sobotta, Perimeter's CEO, and Grant Hesser, portfolio manager at Social Capital, to the podcast. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Hogan. Happy to be here.
So to start, why don't we have Jeremy give us a high-level introduction to Perimeter Medical, and then maybe, Grant, if you could follow that up with a quick introduction of yourself, and then maybe a minute or two on Social Capital and what you guys look for when it comes to healthcare investing.
That sounds great. So Perimeter Medical Imaging AI is an early stage medical device company. We're driven to transform cancer surgery. The unmet need that we're addressing is called intraoperative margin assessment. And in a solid cancer surgery, what that means is the surgeon removes the tumor from the patient, and the standard of care would require that they have a barrier of cancer-free tissue around the outside of that specimen, the perimeter of the specimen. If they do not achieve that cancer-free barrier, patients need to come back for costly and complicated additional operations. And what Perimeter's technology does is brings the imaging information into the OR so that the surgeon can see that in real time. We're at commercial stage with our flagship technology, the Perimeter S-Series OCT, announced our first commercial installation in late 2021. And we're at clinical validation on the next generation of that technology, which includes our image assist artificial intelligence software that will help surgeons interpret those images in the case of breast cancer. And then as we think beyond those initial applications, we have a very exciting $3.7 billion total addressable market across all solid cancer types and across the continuum of care in cancer surgery. So very exciting opportunities in front of us.
I'm Grant Hesser, a PM at Social Capital. I've been at Social for a little over a year at this point, where I primarily focus on public market healthcare investing. Prior to joining the firm, I spent 6 years or so as a sell-side equity research analyst, first covering large cap biotech, and then ultimately managed care, hospitals, and some other healthcare services businesses as well. So covering these kinds of companies on the sell side and everything that sort of entails is where I got my grounding in the sector. As it relates to social capital, look, our mission is to partner with entrepreneurs to build, technically difficult, useful, additive products towards, a better world across areas like climate science, healthcare, financial services, things that even the starting line for people. So in the context of Perimeter, it's to create a better healthcare system. We've taken a pretty diverse approach to tackling this problem. For example, we recently launched a number of SPACs that are specifically focused on biotechnology and closed deals with companies taking new approaches to big problems like cognitive health and disease treatment and prevention. Spending a minute maybe on how we think about the healthcare investing landscape more broadly. Look, I personally think that no other sector in the economy today needs more technology-driven disruption than healthcare over the next few decades. And that encompasses everything from payment model reform to AI/ML integration to bringing therapeutics to market that meaningfully bend the cost curve. Healthcare spending is 20% of U.S. GDP and has been plagued by this sort of unwavering level of inflation over the past few decades. Now, look, some of that is demographics, right? So 10,000 people a day are turning 65 and aging into Medicare from the baby boomer generation. But, clearly more innovation is needed if we're going to rein in spending. And so whether it's investing in companies geared towards, delivering value-based care as we transition away from, a legacy fee-for-service payment system, medtech businesses that lower costs and improve patient outcomes like Perimeter, or new biotechnology businesses that are developing, truly novel compounds that are addressing areas of high unmet medical need. We're interested in all of it. And Chamath and the firm are willing to back businesses that we believe in for, frankly, as long as it takes.
Thank you both for those introductions. And maybe Grant, I think that was a great introduction to social capital and also what you look for in healthcare. And so let's start off, Grant, by talking about this substantial investment that Social has made in Perimeter. What was the motivation from Social's perspective to step up and fund Perimeter?
Sure. Yeah, look, when we first started looking at Perimeter, what stuck out to us was both the clear near-term opportunity as it relates to lowering lumpectomy re-excision rates today, but even more importantly, what this company could become over time if we're able to broaden OCT and its AI platform into other tumor types as well. But let's unpack lumpectomy a bit first, right? So, it's estimated that something like 190,000 women will undergo a lumpectomy procedure in the U.S. this year, where 25% of those procedures will have to be redone. In other words, one in four of those women will have to go through a second or sometimes even third surgery because the cancer wasn't completely removed the first time. That's nearly 50,000 re-excision procedures that by definition could have been avoided. And at roughly, call it $16,000 a procedure, it's pretty clear to us why high re-excision rates are sort of this lose, call it, for patients, payers, and providers. Particularly for these women. When you hear them discuss the added pain, and anguish that's brought on from having to do an additional unnecessary surgery, it just became clear as day to us why we needed to do something about this and help Perimeter, scale the platform. Next, what got us excited about Perimeter was OCT's potential applicability beyond just breast cancer, right? High re-excision rates exist in a number of other tumor types as well. So over time, you'll hopefully see us go after a number of these opportunities with total addressable markets that are even larger than breast cancer is today. On the AI front, Image Assist, once approved, could be a real game changer. Now, look, we've obviously started running the pivotal trial, so we don't want to say too much, but look, clearly the technology could help meaningfully improve surgeons' ability to further lower re-excision rates and could definitely help improve, Perimeter's commercial go-to-market. So we'll stay tuned there. And then just lastly, getting to know the Perimeter team and the bench of just really strong, seasoned med tech executives here gave us a lot of confidence in this company's ability to execute. Jeremy, in particular, as a former Stryker and Smith and Nephew executive, really impressed us. And with his background in M&A as well, I think gives us some really interesting optionality over time to grow this business on a number of fronts. So I'll leave it there.
When I was preparing for this interview, I was sort of going through your annual letters, and I can certainly see the fit for Social Capital as it pertains to the B-Series OCT technology from Perimeter, given its sort of AI component. But Perimeter is kind of unique because it also has this FDA-cleared S-Series technology, which, although it doesn't have the image assist AI, is still, commercially available today. So I'm sort of curious, in your investment process, when you were going through it, looking at Perimeter, how much weight did you put on that first gen technology, that currently FDA cleared early commercial launch S-Series, relative to the sort of blue sky, home run potential B-Series?
Yeah, sure. So look, the S-Series is very important to our investment thesis, and we think Perimeter can build a really great business with that as its backbone alone. Now, of course, the S-Series probably requires a bit more, call it commercial elbow grease, especially as we have to spend more time on, the surgeon education component, for example. But at the end of the day, if we can derive a step function lower re-excision rate for surgeons and hospitals with the S-Series, there's a ton of value there on a standalone basis. And then on Image Assist and the B-Series, look, it's obviously important to develop software and tools that makes it, even easier for surgeons to use OCT with more confidence. And when you speak with physicians who've used the technology, the feedback is extremely positive. But again, let's take it one day at a time, finish the clinical trial and get the data and go from there.
Right. So I think you've almost answered maybe my next question, which is, as it pertains to the S-Series, do you think Perimeter as a standalone with just the S-Series can be a success?
Yes, absolutely. Look, it's a device that can still reduce re-excision rates by at least half. So there's definitely a place for that kind of product, regardless of Image Assist.
Yeah, and thanks for that overview there, Grant. But I would also layer on, from a regulatory strategy perspective, we very intentionally have a general tissue clearance on the S-Series. So, this is cleared by the FDA under a 510K for evaluation of any human tissue microstructure. And it's when we get into these tissue-specific applications, like are required by Image Assist and the, machine learning algorithm, that's when we can unlock additional value streams from each tissue type. So I think, ongoing, there will always be a demand from the marketplace for the S-Series without image interpretation software. And then, there will continue to be a regulatory pathway that we drive tissue-specific indications with our AI. So, both they're not mutually exclusive, I guess I'd say.
And I think that's a great point. Obviously, the B-Series with the Image Assist is earmarked for a breast cancer label, but the S-Series does have that sort of more open-ended, as you say, sort of non-tissue specific application, so that physicians and surgeons can be more experimental, I suppose you could say, with the S-Series.
Precisely.
Maybe Jeremy, building on that, when we think of the competitive landscape for your OCT technologies, what are you displacing? What are you replacing? Can you just lay out the competitive landscape that you're currently facing, both with the S-Series and maybe the B-Series?
Certainly. Yeah, I would say we are truly a novel technology, and we really, in the truest sense of the word, do not have competition out there. What I would say, particularly in the space of breast lumpectomies, we have, substitutes that are suboptimal for a number of reasons. So, there may be surgeons, specimen radiography is pretty widely used, which is a situation where the surgeon x-rays the specimen. They're typically doing that to ensure that they have not removed, or that they have removed all of the foreign objects that they put into the patient for navigation purposes. So it's a retained foreign object liability reduction tool. But one of the body's responses is it creates kind of calcium deposits or microcalcifications. And so some surgeons will use that as a proxy for margins. Unfortunately, you're looking at the symptoms of the disease instead of the disease itself, like Perimeter's technology can show you. Then at the other end of the spectrum, you have, a small percentage of institutions will try to bring the pathology process into the operating room. It's very challenging with, most of these large organ cancer surgeries because you have fatty tissue that's difficult to freeze, you're destructive to the tissue in the OR, you require specialized resources like a pathology lab close to the OR and a pathologist to interpret the images. So you go from specimen radiography being low cost, low resolution on one end to frozen section pathology being high cost, high resolution on the other end. And, in the middle, Perimeter's technology can give you that microscopic level resolution at a cost effective price point, one that makes economic sense for the large academic institutions and the community hospitals. So what we like to say is, effectively, we are democratizing the kind of outcomes that patients could expect in, a Mayo Clinic or a Memorial Sloan Kettering, for example, throughout all of the, providers, whether it be a general surgeon that's operating in a community hospital or a, breast-specific surgeon that's in a large academic institution.
Oh, terrific. Thanks, Jeremy. So Grant, turning back to a comment you made in your one of your earlier comments on your investment process with regards to Perimeter, you mentioned speaking to surgeons. So I'm curious, how those conversations went. Obviously, you made a substantial investment in Perimeter, so I think we can maybe assume that those conversations went well. But I'm kind of wondering, did you get a sense when talking to surgeons that the reoperation rate as it pertains to lumpectomy is as big a problem as sort of portrayed by Perimeter?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So look, first on the re-excision rate, I think the rate varies a lot from facility to facility and even from OR to OR. As you can imagine, the most advanced cancer centers out there have access to more of the leading edge technologies like frozen section and have generally lower rates in call it the single digits. But then you can hear about re-excision rates well into the 50% in certain community hospital settings. So the rate varies a lot, but there's a lot of literature that really backs up that, on average, it's somewhere between 20 and 25%. On the physician feedback point, doctors are really excited about the S-Series as well as Image Assist. And maybe what I thought I would do is just share a few quotes from my conversations that have really stuck with me through our diligence process. So I'll just share a few of those now. And the first one being, look, Perimeter's OCT provides a democratization of skill that makes us all better surgeons. The second one being, most institutions don't have frozen section or the skill/personnel. So this cost-effective alternative has a lot of potential. This third quote really sticks with me, which is patient outcomes and feedback matter now more than ever. And this technology would allow everyone to get Mayo level results, though Mayo is using frozen section. And then lastly, this is the holy grail of breast cancer surgery. So, a lot of pretty striking quotes that we picked up through our diligence process. I'd also highlight that during our diligence, we also spoke with hospital purchasing managers at major healthcare systems who specifically called out intraoperative margin assessment technologies as a key area of spending interest over the coming years as well, especially as we hopefully exit the COVID pandemic. So the feedback all around was very, very positive. To quickly answer the question.
following up on maybe a comment that Jeremy had made earlier about the S-Series and its ability to be maybe used outside of, because it's got a general tissue label. Did you get a sense from some of the surgeons you spoke with about sort of excitement around experimenting with Perimeter's OCT technology outside of breast surgery?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's obviously early days there, but the general tissue optionality, frankly, is going to be an important part of where Perimeter goes next in terms of the technology. But I don't know, Jeremy, do you want to add anything to that in terms of letting the data and the feedback from physicians really drive how we think about, what's up next?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Grant. I'd say this has been some of the most exciting output from our later clinical work and our early commercial work. And speaking to surgeons specifically, those general surgeons that are doing breast lumpectomies, they're pretty quickly saying, this is great. I don't only want to use it on my breast patients. I want to use it on whatever, insert other oncology application there. Pancreas seems to be popping up pretty regularly. Kidney, head and neck are pretty exciting areas for us. And, the beautiful thing about that is our organization has been very focused on getting the B-Series breast specific indication out there. And that focus has been very beneficial for us as we build this foundation and, make sure we do this one thing right. But now we get a commercial way to achieve market feedback as we start reallocating some of those resources into thinking about what's next for Image Assist. And then I would just also kind of chime in that it's not only breast surgeons that express that excitement, or not only surgeons that express that excitement when they see and get to play with the technology, pathology, and we're very close with pathologists. I would consider them kind of a secondary champion of our technology in the institution, and radiologists as well. So we're very excited about expanding this both, what I call horizontally into other tissue types, but also kind of across the surgical continuum of care, whether that be in the biopsy space or in the pathology space as well. And the feedback and the opportunities from our customers there's been no shortage of ideas on ways to use this technology to add value in other parts.
Thank you both. I mean, I think that's, I guess what I'm trying to drive at, and I think you both hit the nail on the head, is that, there's obviously platform potential here with Perimeter's OCT technology. So maybe, Jeremy, let's transition to the B-Series. And, this is an area that I think is going to be an area of great clinical intrigue for investors in 2022. So you've got FDA IDE approval, and you're currently running a pivotal study with the B-Series. So can you maybe elaborate on, this study, timelines to data, and what investors should be looking for as far as endpoints and how we determine success in this current pivotal study?
Certainly, Hogan. Thanks. Yeah, that was a big part of the momentum we started building at the end of 2021. So announced our first site up enrolling patients. We've been expanding the number of sites up and running, and the overall study as a whole is 309 patients. And what we are, the primary endpoint for us is the number of patients with unaddressed positive margins. So, the thing I would say there is what we're trying to do is kind of take it one step further. So, there is a little bit of an art in deciding clinical judgment on who comes back for a reoperation and who doesn't. So what we are saying is we want to prove that we can show the surgeon everything they need to understand those margins on a per margin basis, which is really exciting because, we kind of take it to the very root cause and base case of giving them the information they need to make their clinical decision. And to power the study, we've taken some, from my perspective, pretty conservative views on incidence of standard of care positive margins and the ability of the technology, Perimeter's technology, to reduce those reoperation rates and identify those positive margins. So we're pretty confident that we'll be able to achieve those endpoints. And what we would be considering success is a reduction in patients that had an unaddressed positive margin by 50%. So that's enough to power the study, enough to meet our endpoints, and we think that, along with the secondary analysis around cosmesis, patient perception on performance of the procedure, and some additional analysis on volume of tissue removed and some of those things to drive at improved specificity from the surgeons, we're pretty excited that it would be sufficient to support a marketing application at the end of the study. And from a timeline perspective, we would expect to have all of those patients enrolled throughout 2022 and have that marketing application submitted by the end of the year. And at today's thinking is that it will most likely be a de novo application submitted to the FDA.
Thanks, Jeremy. That's great. And then I guess I'm curious about Grant and Social's take on this pivotal study. When I think of social capital, I don't necessarily think about a company or a fund that invests in clinical trial readouts. This seems like it might be a bit of a unique type of investment, given the the sort of clinical intrigue that's going to come out of the B-Series IDE study. How do you guys think about this pivotal study and probability of success?
Sure. Look, if you're looking to really be disruptive in healthcare, a big part of that is building companies and products and solutions that use technology to better prevent, treat, and in some cases cure the diseases we're talking about. And frankly, no biotech or medtech company is going to be very successful at doing that without strong clinical data. So it certainly comes with the territory, and I think we've demonstrated the desire to get in on the ground floor or close to it with some of these companies, because that's what it takes to make a real difference. For example, one of our SPACs just announced with a merger with ProKidney, which is making big strides in chronic kidney disease, and the bulk of our funds raised will go towards their clinical programs. So when it comes down to it, we're in the business of making big bets, whether it's tackling existential problems like climate change or scaling a small OCT company into a medtech powerhouse. We're excited about Perimeter's catalyst path from here, and the AI trial is obviously an important part of that. In any case, we do our homework and the diligence around it, so we can confidently underwrite this investment, and in this case, we feel really good about Perimeter's path ahead.
To me, this is a huge part of the story here in 2022. So I'm really excited about watching, these data come out. I know Jeremy and I have spoken a few times, and he knows my bias as to how much potential upside I think there is in success in this study. So I do think that's a really exciting part of the story coming up here in 2022.
Yeah, Hogan, and I just, maybe it's helpful for the listeners to hear a little bit about some of the initiatives we've put in place to try to de-risk those results, as you mentioned. And, I think if you look at the overall, effectively, this is the pivotal study is the output or the final step in what we've called our Atlas AI project. And, the steps prior to embarking on the pivotal study have all been done with de-risking the results in mind. So, the collection of additional data, that was part one, which we finished up in 2021. The output of that was effectively the developed algorithm, and we were thrilled with the results of the standalone algorithm performance. So it exceeded our internal benchmarks, which really set us up for success. And then in between finalizing development of the algorithm and embarking on the actual pivotal study, we've been engaged in reader studies throughout with the surgeons that will be participating in the pivotal study. So effectively, you can think of this as an offline read to kind of test and evaluate their performance prior to going into live patients and live data. And again, the grand mean has exceeded our expectations. We've been thrilled with surgeon performance there to give us a lot of confidence prior to them enrolling live patients. And then, as you and Grant both alluded to earlier on what we call the commercial elbow grease around the S-Series, surgeon education and investigator education has been a huge initiative for us throughout 2021. And, we're very, very pleased with the level of talent we have out there from a clinical education perspective. We have what we call image training specialists out there in the field, helping to onboard these new surgeons, helping them through their roll-in patients as they're getting up and running in the study. And then, internal training and education folks that have been developing a significant amount of content to make sure that they're hitting the ground running when they do. So, a lot of work has been done to really arm our investigators with the most material possible to help them be successful with the technology.
And I think we probably should also mention the breakthrough device designation, Jeremy and Grant. I mean, I don't know how much, Grant, that weighed in on your, investment thinking, and maybe Jeremy, you can briefly elaborate on the importance of it as far as your IDE study and your interactions with FDA.
Definitely. That was a huge milestone for Perimeter and for the technology. And back to the timelines I just went over. So that came out of exiting our initial part of the Atlas AI project, the data collection study. So yet again, another indication of the algorithm's potential and standalone performance. And, it's significant for us for a few different reasons. One, effectively, it is an acknowledgement by the FDA that we have an innovative way, a new and an innovative way for solving a major problem in healthcare. Similar to what I was saying earlier, there really is no competition for us, and breakthrough device designation is just another indicator that it is completely novel, addressing an unmet need. And what that does from a regulatory front is, helps to prioritize our review by the FDA. So you effectively have kind of a fast track to getting your documentation and interactions prioritized, but also it enables a path to have increased interactions with the agency, which is particularly great as we're going through, a novel technology like this. So they have what's called a breakthrough sprint strategy, where you can take a topic that is important for the regulatory pathway, bring it to the agency, and get some real feedback from them in real time, so that as you're kind of making key development and design decisions across the regulatory pathway, you have some input from the FDA. And, for us, that looks like, some of the things we've already talked about around the protocol and its ability to support a marketing application. As we think about machine learning and our quality management system, how do we enable getting that to market, safely and effectively for patients as quickly as possible, but also enabling, increased updates and efficacy of that image assist software as we continue to collect more data post-market. So a lot of really exciting things there. And then lastly, I just, mention the interaction between, the FDA and some of the, payer environments out there, like CMS, and some of the initiatives that are pending legislation at the moment, like the Medicare coverage of innovative technology. What an exciting initiative, tailwind for Perimeter, should that be enacted and go into effect. Effectively, it gives you, immediate CMS coverage as soon as the FDA clears your device for market. So, this is interagency cooperation between the regulator ensuring safety and efficacy, but also ensuring that the Medicare, Medicaid population out there can get access to that technology. And it's been one of the barriers for providers adopting new technology. So we're really looking forward to that being enacted and finalized, and it would certainly be a tailwind for Perimeter.
Well, that kind of segues nicely maybe into my next question, which was with regards to reimbursement, and Grant, in your previous life, pre-social, as you mentioned, you were on the sell side and had done some work in managed care. So I think reimbursement for a lot of us is somewhat of an opaque world. And, I'm curious how you, given your, sort of expertise in this area, looked at reimbursement as it relates to Perimeter and its OCT technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Yeah. So look, the instrument has, a category 3 code, and it's going to provide us with a lot of useful, call it tracking data through 2022 that, obviously as we commence, the commercial rollout of the product. And so we'll eventually be able to go to commercial payers with this data to drive hopefully favorable reimbursement decisions. But also remember that as a part of the pivotal Atlas trial, we're also running a healthcare economic study as well that we think can deliver some really important data about the cost savings generated by the B-Series as well. Look, at the end of the day, commercial payers like United and Anthem are looking for value, and we think that both the S-Series and B-Series can generate meaningful cost savings when just one unnecessary re-excision procedure costs, roughly $16,000. Then we'll obviously look to share our views with CMS as well as it relates to Medicare and Medicaid coverage. So more to come there. Maybe taking a step back too, we also think Perimeter's technology plays really well into broader bundled payment and value-based care reforms as well. So, there's obviously an increasing focus on paying for value over volume of service in our healthcare system. So we think Perimeter is really well situated between those themes as well.
So how do you both think of Perimeter's OCT technology ex-US? Obviously, I think when it comes to everything healthcare, the US market is where we all like to focus. But I'm curious, both Jeremy and Grant, how much time and effort and thought has been put into both the S-Series and B-Series and ex-US development and opportunity?
Sure. Maybe I'll jump in, Jeremy, and then you can take it.
Perfect.
Look, ex-US, we think is a really interesting opportunity. Specific geographies like the United Kingdom that has a public registry for re-excision rates by provider is really interesting in terms of our ability to go into a geography like that and be very selective in our targeting of providers that have high re-excision rates to drive those lower. So look, here and now we're obviously focused on executing commercially in the US, but lumpectomy re-excision rates are not a US problem, right? It's a global problem. And so you'll see us over time as the commercial function really gets up and running, us try to go out and take advantage of those opportunities. I don't know, Jeremy, if you had more to add there.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, Grant. I would say, as somebody who has lived and worked in Europe and Africa, and had a number of my colleagues complain to me about how U.S.-centric companies, create their organization structures as U.S. and OUS. It pains me a little bit to talk about this as the entire rest of the world market as ex-U.S. But that being said, you're exactly right. There is a lot of opportunity there, and they, particularly what I'd say are, your more classic medtech markets, some of those that you highlighted, Grant, have very similar, reoperation profiles. Actually, frankly, I think the single payer environment makes this a much more straightforward implementation, or makes it much more desirable because effectively you have the same bottom line that you're working with there. So that's pretty exciting for us. And the last thing I'd say is in some of the developing economies, we really have an opportunity to kind of ride the wave of a paradigm shift. So, for example, in the US, only about 2/3 of women elect to have breast conserving surgeries. Now, there's a lot of, survivorship being more or less equal based on the data. There's a lot of benefits to having breast conserving surgery around cosmesis and sensation and, quality of survivorship. But in a lot of the developing economies, that number is much, much smaller. Far more radical mastectomies are performed. And I'd like to think that Perimeter's technology can be kind of a catalyst to drive more of that adoption of what is becoming more and more standard of care in the developed world in breast conserving surgeries instead of those mastectomies.
Thanks. That's I tend to, in our healthcare investing sort of mindset, we tend to define everything as US and ex-US, but I do appreciate there's more nuance there than perhaps I'm stating. It's just my capital markets brain always sort of working a certain way. And speaking of capital markets, let's transition to maybe a few questions as it pertains to the stock itself. So right now, Jeremy, you are TSX Venture listed, and you're on the OTC exchange in the United States. And this also pertains to Grant. How important is it for you to get to a senior U.S. exchange in the near future? And I'm curious, both from a company perspective and also Grant from the perspective of social. How big a priority is that for both of you?
Grant, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, sure. Look, it's definitely a priority for us. Look, I think we want to make sure that, we're executing from a commercial standpoint before we, really try to bring the story to U.S. markets in a real way. So I think there's some more wood to chop on that point. But look, it's definitely a part of our roadmap. Frankly, one of the elements of our investment thesis in Perimeter is there's a bit of a sort of a Canada to U.S. arbitrage to take advantage of here, right? Like there are very real, exciting Canadian companies that are sort of at the cutting edge of innovation in terms of medical technology. And, U.S. investors, frankly, are often overlooking these opportunities only because they're Canadian domiciled. And so, when the time is right, and Jeremy can talk a little bit more about what those conditions look like, we'll definitely look to bring Perimeter to the U.S. in a pretty material way.
Great. Yeah. And I would just echo everything you said and say that this is where the Toronto Venture Exchange has been a phenomenal partner for us in, helping us get to public in an efficient manner. Obviously, it created access to capital like the social capital private placement. And, we do have squarely in our strategic initiatives upgrading to or uplisting to a senior exchange. And I think everything that Grant talked about is important for us on, knowing when that is right. So we just commercialized at the end of 2021. We're in the thick of our clinical study now, and we want to have some, fundamental operational quarters behind us before doing that. So that we don't get up there, be an orphan and not have, the right kind of things to be talking about when we're up there. But, at this point, we've satisfied what I'll call our, almost all of the administrative tasks to enabling that. And now it's just a matter of, executing operationally and making that the right move at the right time.
Well, Jeremy, it must be music to your ears, though, to hear that your lead investor wants you to be prudent and patient in pushing towards the US market. I think that's such a nice luxury to have, something like Social, who's saying, look, when the time's right, you'll go, but we're not pushing you and pressuring you to get there too soon. And Grant, as a Canadian, I've lived and breathed the Canadian discount for a long time, and I completely agree. It exists and is a ongoing phenomena. And I concur that sometimes there are fantastic technologies and frankly bargains north of the border. So I commend you guys for stepping up here on Perimeter and seeing this as an opportunity. So maybe just to wrap things up, Jeremy, here we are, beginning of 2022. You've got potentially very exciting cadence of news events throughout the year. So maybe you can walk investors through what we should be expecting and looking for this year. We've talked about the IDE study, but maybe you can wrap things up and maybe also elaborate a little bit on what we should be looking for from the S-Series as far as news events, whether it be new machine placements, new centers of excellence adopting, et cetera. So maybe walk us through what investors should be looking for the rest of calendar 2022.
Yeah, that's exactly right. On the S-Series specifically, our number one priority is executing commercially here in the near term with the S-Series. And what I've talked about around our go-to-market strategy is 2022 and the S-Series commercial customers are about building the foundation and building the future thought leaders of that technology so that we have a network around the country of expert users so that when Image Assist and the B-Series is cleared, we can effectively expand our immediate addressable market with that artificial intelligence. So having, it's less, I would point investors to think less about how many placements we're putting out there throughout the year and more about who is picking it up and using it. And, our kind of primary profiles would be, the centers of excellence that you alluded to that are kind of the reference bellwethers in breast cancer specifically, but also, giving proof points of that democratization of technology that I talked about earlier. So if we have community hospitals that are using this technology to provide those patients with access to those kind of outcomes that, otherwise they'd have to drive into the big city for, we're really excited about proving that. And also helping those surgeons build their practice with differentiating technology like this. So I would expect a lot of news around the S-Series. We have a busy, Congress and trade show season pretty early in the year. So there will be some data presented by a number of our key opinion leaders at those conferences, not the least of which being, American Society of Breast Surgeons happening in Las Vegas in April. So really, really looking forward to making a big splash there. And then on the clinical study, continuing to enroll patients and providing updates as that comes and getting, great feedback from those investigators with the artificial intelligence. But then lastly, I'd say, one of the things that excites me the most about having this strong balance sheet is the ability to accelerate that commercial activity through the placement business model that, now we have the working capital to help drive that and the inventory to help drive that placement business model, which should shorten our sales cycle, but also really in earnest starting to focus on what's next for the technology. So everything we talked about early on the call around, if we have a general surgeon that says, I want to use this on my pancreas patients, we can, pretty quickly allocate development resources to making that a reality. And same thing on the rest of the workflow. I think we've got some early work, feasibility work to be done, whether it's in biopsy or pathology to try to prove out some of the value we can create there and really expand, not our TAM, but our immediate addressable TAM. So lots of exciting things for investors to look for throughout the year.
Thanks, Jeremy. And so Grant, maybe to wrap things up, we kind of touched, I think, on a lot of the key points of the Perimeter investment thesis, but are there things that we didn't cover off that you'd like to highlight, or is there anything you'd like to sort of say as far as summarizing your thoughts on Perimeter?
Yeah, I mean, look, maybe to talk a little bit more about, accelerating the path to other clinical applications in the future. So as I've mentioned, high re-excision rates aren't just a lumpectomy problem. And so, we think there's a real opportunity to, over time, go after other tissue types and other parts of the clinical workflow that, will allow us to unlock what we think is nearly a $4 billion total addressable market. Now, we're going to let the data and physician feedback really drive where we go next. But, the devices, again, general tissue clearance from the FDA really gives us a lot of optionality in that regard. But, whether it's colorectal or prostate or bladder, or I think Jeremy mentioned head and neck as well, or something else, we're really excited about the opportunity to broaden OCT's applicability beyond breast over time, but at the same time, trying to stay laser focused on executing in lumpectomy and helping patients.
Terrific. Well, I want to thank you both for agreeing to come on the podcast and giving us such a great overview, both of the company Perimeter and also Social Capital and its thinking around its investment in Perimeter. As a Perimeter shareholder, I am ecstatic to have Social as the largest shareholder in Perimeter. So I'm very excited about what the future holds here. I want to thank you both for agreeing to be here, and thanks again for your time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us, Hogan.
A few concluding comments after my interview with Perimeter Medical's Jeremy Sobotta and Social Capital's Grant Hesser. I think there's a lot to like with Perimeter Medical. I don't think I hide my enthusiasm very well. And as I disclosed at the front end and during the interview, we own the equity. We've written research on the company. We like Perimeter Medical. And in fact, I take it a step further. We like it more today with Social Capital's investment and their endorsement. So I think there's a lot to like here. A few things I would highlight that I think I learned a little more about today and perhaps are things that investors should also keep their eyes on. I thought that both Jeremy and Grant did a really good job talking about the S-Series and how it will be a tool for experimentation outside of breast. It's an FDA 510K cleared product. It doesn't have a specific tissue type label. That's what the B-Series will have. It's because of the AI element. It's going to be exclusively focused on breast conservation surgery. But the S-Series is open-ended, and I think that's interesting. I mean, at first they're obviously going to focus on breast cancer, but once one of these machines is installed inside a hospital, I can see other surgeons wanting to experiment with it. So I think that's something we should be, that could be a real interesting development as this story evolves over the coming months and years, is where does the S-Series go after breast? And we've heard from Jeremy and Grant, other tissue types that they think could play out. As a investor in many therapeutic names, I'm obviously somewhat biased towards the clinical data readout that we're going to see from the B-Series IDE study. I thought both Jeremy and Grant did a great job. Jeremy laid out the study design and what we should be looking for success in that study. Clearly, the Social guys, Grant, have done their work on this, and they feel very confident in a positive outcome. So, I think that is the opportunity for the most violent upside, in my opinion. It would be a successful IDE pivotal study result for Perimeter, and couple that with the breakthrough device designation. I think you've got a real exciting formula for the future for Perimeter. So a lot of eyes, I think, should be focused on that B-Series study outcome. But as I asked Grant, there is a business here with the S-Series alone. So, lots to like with Perimeter. And I thought that both Grant and Jeremy gave us lots of great information to sort of digest. I would also suggest that our research from October 2020, although dated now, still the overall macro sort of viewpoint that we take there, I think is still very relevant to Perimeter today. Our timelines are a little off. We refer to the OCT technology under its old name, which is Otis, but I'd recommend investors who are interested in Perimeter to perhaps go and revisit our research, which I think is still relevant to the story today. Just a final thanks again to Jeremy and Grant for stepping up and being willing to come onto the podcast. I really do appreciate their support. And also, finally, to our audience, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the feedback. We had lots of comments actually from people during our sort of hiatus as to where we were. And no, we weren't, hiding per se, but we were a little shell-shocked like a lot of people. And frankly, it was hard to get people's attention on individual securities when the overall sky was falling, so to speak. But I think you'll see a regular cadence of podcasts from us going forward. So again, thank you to our audience. Thank you to Grant and Jeremy, and look forward to speaking to you all soon again with our next interview.